Joining us now, Jack Rice, who is a former CIA officer, also host of Air America's Live in Washington with Jack Rice, noon to 3 Eastern. Check your local listings for that. Jack is the best person I could think of to bring us up to speed on this new development here. Jack, welcome to the show.
Great to be back with you, Ron.
Should we be surprised that Ahmed Wali Karzai, President Hamid Karzai's brother, has reportedly been on the CIA payroll for 8 years?
You know, probably not, based upon some of the things that we have done in the past. Most recently, it came to light that Castro's sister was apparently also on the CIA payroll. I can say with specific knowledge that I know of other people around the world who have relatives on the payroll as well. When I worked at CIA, I still recall seeing some of that. I can't be specific, but in general, I know that it's true. The problem with it, of course, is this guy is one of the strongest drug warlords in Afghanistan. So you have a real hard time when you're saying you're fighting the war on drugs while, in fact, you're employing one of the biggest drug distributors in the country.
Which raises the question, does this make the CIA complicit in opium production that supplies about 90% of the world's heroin trade?
Yes. How about that? Yeah, it does.
Good direct answer.
I mean, of course it does. I mean, it's the equivalent. If you assumed that the CIA were a private organization, and we found that private organization was funding the senior member of the organization, and that money was going directly into the production itself, and that organization knew about it, they would be complicit. They would be seen as part of the criminal conspiracy. The only difference is that this is a government organization rather than a private one. If I were prosecuting this case, and I'm a former prosecutor, if I could make that argument, that's the one that I would make. So yes, complicity is there, without question.
The fact that Ahmed Wali Karzai, Hamid Karzai's brother, is on the CIA payroll, does that suggest to you that Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, is also probably being paid by the CIA?
That would be my guess. I would suspect early on they probably paid him. I think the biggest problem, whether he's on the payroll or not, is this really highlights not just the incompetency of the Karzai regime, but the illegitimacy of it. You look at the last set of elections where UN officials and EU officials determined that at least one-third of the votes, more than 1 million votes, were actually fraudulent in favor of Hamid Karzai. Mm-hmm. And then you tie that to this question of funding of his brother, who was a well-known drug lord. You tie those two together and you tell me, how competent and how legitimate does that make the American government look? This is a real serious problem.
I don't suppose that the CIA wanted us to know that they were paying off Karzai. I'm sure they probably didn't want the world to know or have it advertised. But how and why do you think that this information actually leaked?
You know, that's a really interesting point. If you take a look at one of the reports that came out, Dexter Filkins is one of the best journalists for the New York Times. The guy is based in Afghanistan most of the time. He's very, very sharp. And what they're referring to are government officials. And it's a great question, because if you see that this has been leaked right now, literally right before the next election, which is scheduled for November 7th, it highlights just where the American government may be. Is the government playing a role in this, trying to sort of drive the elections in a particular direction? I don't know. But what it does show, really, is just the precarious position that the Americans are in. If somebody is looking for a really good decision for President Obama right now, you won't find it. There is not a good one here.
I don't know how much the CIA was paying Karzai, but the Karzai government, of course, is widely reviled and seen as illegitimate by many, many Afghans. Are we getting much bang for our buck there, do you think?
Boy, what a great question that is. I'm afraid in the end we aren't. If you look at how much money we're spending in the region right now, the estimate is $1 billion for every 1,000 U.S. troops. With General McChrystal asking for 40,000, you obviously can figure out that number. The estimate is in excess of $4 billion a month right now. And with the Taliban winning this war, I don't see why an additional 10, 20, 30, or 40,000 more U.S. troops is frankly going to make even a lick of difference here.
And you know, this idea of paying kind of people like this, does, historically speaking, does paying off some son of a bitch to be our son of a bitch, does it usually pay off?
You know, I love the fact that you asked this question, Ron, because when I go on TV or elsewhere, people usually miss this. This is one of the biggest problems with the CIA. This is one of the reasons that I actually left the CIA. The CIA is regularly myopic. They look at one little narrow thing, and they have a tendency of not looking sort of big picture at blowback and ramifications. What happens here is the CIA's obsession is with getting information right now for today, tomorrow, next week, and maybe next month on the outside. But the real impact is massive. The problem that you get is while we may get something, this guy is our son of a bitch. But you know what? Everybody else in the country sees him as a son of a bitch. And now we're just simply another one who's out there promoting it and supporting it. It makes us not just look worse, it makes us look hypocritical because we talk about democracy and holding up humanitarian values, and you realize the rest of the world looks at us and says, really? How's that Karzai thing going for you? By the way, you remember the whole Shah of Iran thing? Oh, that was yours too. Shall I take you to Central and South America? Damn, that was CIA as well.
Exactly.
Real problem.
Afghan government forces have begun a new offensive against Taliban militants in the province of Helmand, where Allied forces suffered many of their casualties in more than a decade of fighting in Afghanistan. NATO troops ended their combat mission in 2014. Few journalists have been into Helmand since. But Justin Rowlatt has visited the former British base of Camp Bastion, now called Camp Shorabak.
I'm flying to what is left of Camp Bastion. Bastion was the main British base in Afghanistan. Very few journalists have been here since the British withdrew. So this is what remains of that vast complex. It's now called Camp Shorabak and is the headquarters of Afghan National Forces. But one thing hasn't changed. Helmand is still, without question, the key front line in the battle against the Taliban. But the record of Afghan forces has not been good. They've made what they call strategic withdrawals from a series of key towns in Helmand in recent months. It is a roll call of places British troops gave their lives to defend. Sangin, Musa Qala, Nada Ali. So is strategic withdrawal just another way of saying surrender?
So around us is what was formerly known as Bastion Leatherneck.
Brigadier General Rowling is with Resolute Support, the current NATO mission in Afghanistan.
You're using terms like surrender, so I would say we have withdrawn from areas that they formerly held. Yes, I think what we're trying to say is, okay, after this year, let's look at the capabilities of the Afghan army, let's look where they're best postured, and let's help them and help themselves get to a place where that they can fight reasonably for the long term.
This is the training part of Resolute Support's mission. It also offers advice and assistance, but is it working? A big test of that has just begun, a major offensive to retake Sangin. The Afghans could expect a tough battle. Over 100 British soldiers died defending Sangin in some of the fiercest fighting British forces have experienced for decades. This is what funds it, opium. This year's harvest is already underway and it's expected to be another record breaker. Helmand now produces enough heroin to supply the world's demand on its own.
There's 3 people, there's another bloke in the actual
The vast profits opium generates is a key reason why, a decade after British forces first came to Helmand, the same familiar territory is being contested in this deadly war. And all the while, local people suffer terrible injuries and are forced from their homes. As I leave Helmand, it isn't hard to understand why so many Afghans want to leave the country and make a new life in Europe. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News, Helmand.